Good morning and welcome to Pine Needles Quilt and Sew on this beautiful Saturday morning. I'm Joy Inglet and I am the host for our virtual Bernina booth. This is the last day of the Minnesota Quilt Show, and I just want to extend a thank you to all of you that have been following along these last 3 days since Wednesday and checking in and leaving comments. I really appreciate it, and I have enjoyed bringing you different tips and tricks and information on machines. Now, just another mention about that, we do still have the summer sale going on for the Bernina sewing machines. There are dollars back. Let's take a look at those savings. So we have 5 series, you get $500 off, 7 series, $700 off, 8 series, $800 off. And because no event would be an event at Pine Needles without extra gifts, Marcia and I have procured some special gifts just for you to go with those purchases. We'll put a link in the comments to our shopping page where you can take a quick peek at those. We have covered them extensively in the last several days, and we do also have financing available to you. We have 48-month financing, 0%, and we have 60-month 0% financing available to you. That helps make your dream machine achievable, and of course we welcome cash, check, or credit card as well. My coworkers are waiting for you to stop in the store today to check out and find what kind of machine you might like. We open at 10 o'clock on Saturdays, and we are open until 4. Monday through Friday, we're open 10 o'clock until 5 o'clock. Of course, you can call the shop. You are welcome to email the shop for pricing on our machine specials. I also would like to mention we have a sale on our Bernina feet, and we have some additional gift with purchase with feet accessories as well. At 10 o'clock today, I'll be talking about some fun feet that do special things, but during this session, our focus is on binding. It's that last final step in our quilt, and you can make it as complicated or easy as you like. There really is no right or wrong way to bind a quilt unless you are taking one to a judged quilt show, as there are quilts that are judged during this particular event. But really, having a finished quilt is important because your family members, your friends, those who receive these wonderful gifts can be wrapped up in that warmth and love that you have created. So we're going to spend a few minutes today, well actually we're going to spend more than a few minutes, but we're going to cover some different ways to finish your quilt. First up, I just have a little sandwich here, and some smaller projects are a good thing to practice on, but I'm kind of a go for the big thing too. There are lots of ways that you can finish this, and what I want to talk about is I've started by putting on most of this binding on this little sample. It's going to be a sample piece where I will showcase different methods that we use at the shop and myself personally to finish quilts. It's not totally comprehensive, and it's not 100% tutorial. We offer classes for that kind of thing. But I just want to highlight some different possibilities for you because, we learn as we go that, there's just a way to do things, but really there's many ways. When I'm sewing my binding onto my quilt, I often use just the 97 foot, which is the 1/4 inch foot. In my case, I use a 97D foot because I have an 880 and I have that integrated dual feed, meaning I have that extra feeding mechanism behind my machine. And I use it because it's easy. It's on my machine, it does a good job, and it gives me the result that I need. So I'm going to go close up here and kind of talk you through, and then we'll go to the machine and I'll show you how to complete that corner. So as I'm sewing along here, I've stopped my sewing at this edge. I'm going to line up the edge of my 1/4 inch seam foot, and I'm going to sew along, and on my 1/4 inch seam foot there is a marking that indicates 1/4 inch from the end of the quilt. It's also on the walking foot sole that has that 1/4 inch marking. So I'm going to sew along until my foot indicator is right here. So it's going to be on the leading edge of my 97 foot, and my needle is going to be back here. So when I get to a 1/4 inch away, I'm going to stop with my needle down, and I'm going to activate my reverse sew. So my project's going along this way. I'm going to stop. Whoops, I'm off screen here, so let me move up a little bit further. I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch from the edge. My needle is down. I'm going to rotate my work, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to back stitch off of my binding edge. At that point, I can use my freehand system to lift my presser foot up, and that will release the thread tension on my machine, and I can pull it forward a little bit. My thread is still attached. I haven't cut anything, and I'm going to go ahead and bend my binding up at this 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to flip it down on top of itself. Now, because I still have this little thread attached here, I'm going to slip my stylus into that thread to help pull this into my needle and snug it up so my needle is right here. And then I'm going to continue to sew forwards. When I get to this point, I'm going to stop and cut my thread, because I'm going to then come back here and show you how to join the two edges into a nice finished edge. So let's go to the machine, and I just want to remind you that when you're putting on your binding, it's very helpful to increase your stitch length to at least 3. 3 seems to be a good number. It gives you plenty of ease in your thread to allow all that extra thickness of your quilt front, your quilt back, your batting, and your 2 layers of binding to lay nice and flat as your stitches are formed. So we're going to go here to the machine. And I need to put my freehand system into my machine, because I had it out earlier. There we go. I got the right model. Since I've been showing different models, I wasn't sure I had the right one. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and lower my presser foot down onto my fabric. I have an automatic presser foot on this model machine, and my binding is lined up with the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. Now, as I approach here, I'm going to slow down a little bit, because remember, I'm looking for, on the side of my foot, I have a little mark where it's exactly a 1/4 inch. I usually set my stylus off the edge so I have a good visual. And as my stylus approaches that magic point, I'm going to go ahead and just stop. I have hover set up on my machine, meaning my presser foot has popped up a little bit. I'm going to rotate my work, as I mentioned. I'm going to back stitch off of my quilt. Now, I'm off of my fabric. I'm going to go ahead and activate my knee lift, and that's what's lifting my presser foot up. I'm going to pull my work forward just a little bit, and remember, the freehand system lifts the presser foot and it releases the tension on our thread so that we can easily and safely pull out a little extra thread. At this point, I've created that little 45-degree angle. I have a thread tail back here. I'm going to use it to help guide my piece back into my foot. And using my stylus instead of my fingers so I don't have any medical accidents here, I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. And I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread so I can show you how to easily figure out how to join your fabric in an angle. So at this point, I have just, I have more than I really need for space. But what we're going to do, let's go close up here. I have my beginning edge here, my stitching stop back here. That's really not important. You'll learn what you have to do. But you see you have the width of your binding. I'm just going to lop off a piece. It doesn't have to be straight. But this is the amount of fabric you need to cut in order to have a nice joint edge. So I have these laid out flat and they're overlapping. I'm going to go ahead and put this fabric so one edge lines up with the underside and the other one extends this way. This is super easy. You don't need to have a ruler or anything fancy. You just have to cut it at the end of that space, and that is exactly the length of tail I need to make an angle join. Now when I go to my machine, you want to take the edge that you just stopped at and you want to open it up flat, and you're going to take the other edge and it's going to curl up over the top and depending on how much space you gave yourself, you may have to bunch it up a bit. So when this is folded this way, I'm actually going to just fold it over and give it a finger crease. And then I'm going to sew along that angle, and I'll be back here in a moment. So at the machine here, I have the piece that I just came off is going into the machine. It would have been easier to have just a little extra fabric here. Once I have a few stitches in place and my needle's down, that's my third hand, I can make adjustments to make sure my corners meet so I get a nice 45-degree angle. I can angle my fabric so that I sew on that line. I'll activate my scissors on my machine to cut. And when I pull it out from my machine, I have made the perfect length that I need. But before I trim anything, I make sure that I don't have my binding strip twisted because that would be a little bit on the tragic side. So at this point, I typically will just lop this off and I'll finger press it and I will continue stitching this down. I'm not going to take time to do that now because I want to move on to the next step of our process. Now, when you make those corners, that is the most important part of having a nice finish on the front and having nice square corners. You need to have a perfect miter, otherwise when you bring it to the front, you may have one of those dome-shaped gnome hat type corners, or you might have one of those scrunched in, curled in corners. So the beginning and ending part is the important part of this area. Now once you have this done, different people do this different ways. Some people just wrap it around the front and they make adjustments as they go. I may be an oddity, but I do like to give mine a little bit of a press out so that I'm sure I don't have any extra fabric on the back. I don't press the edges and I don't press my corners because your fabric fibers kind of need to want to go where they need to want to go. Otherwise you can get wrinkles and puckers as you go in your sewing. So it's important that the fibers of your binding are allowed to rest where they want to rest. But for me, I do like to give it a little bit of a steam from the back. I won't do that now because it isn't really necessary. But the other thing I do in that process then is as I steam, so let's go close up here. As I steam, I make sure that my corner edge here gets pressed nice and flat. And that gives me a nice edge on the front side here when I come around. Now, some people like to fold their fabric and come to the corner and fold up. I would be the opposite, but again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's what works for you. But I choose to fold my bottom edge up first for the following reason. Because when I come to this corner, I don't want to sew into my fold. I want to sew over my fold. I would recommend for you personally to try what works best for you. The advantage of folding up the bottom last is that you can get any extra fabric tucked in. But quite honestly, if you've made a nice mitered corner to begin with, it's going to come out perfect. I don't trim any extra from my corners because that corner sandwich here provides a nice crisp edge for my binding to happen. It takes practice to get that nice corner, but it is totally a possibility. And as I said, that provides a nice stable edge and a crisp edge underneath my area. But again, everybody binds differently. These are just some other ways that you can attempt this. So the first foot that I'm going to use this morning is Marcia's favorite for when she's doing the Serpentine Stitch. And the Serpentine Stitch is kind of a nice little S stitch. On a Bernina, it's stitch number 4 in your practical stitches, or they have also added 3 varieties in the quilter's menu. I'll show you those in a minute, but I'm opening up my really nice handy accessory trunk case here where I keep all my feet, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out 2 feet right away that I'm showcasing this morning. I'm going to pull out my foot number 20D. And what I love about this particular case, let's have a close-up here, is that your feet have each a space of their own, and these crystals that are on your feet are protected from jumbling into each other. So I'm going to get out my 20D foot, and I'm also going to get out my 10D foot. And I'm going to put my case back down. Now, the 20D foot is an open toe foot. It is typically used for applique. Krista Watson uses it for quilting. Brenda demos that way as well. As a binding foot, which is what is nice is the spacing that's in between here actually happens to be about the same thickness as your binding edge that you're working with. That gives you a nice channel to move your binding through. And you could straight stitch, but usually a serpentine stitch or a zigzag stitch is a nice choice. This foot is engineered with a wide groove underneath so that it doesn't hinder the movement of your fabric. So when I use this on the machine, actually let's go to the machine look. When I use this on the machine, I'll give you a visual here of what the foot looks like. You have this big wide open toe, and when I use stitch number 4, it looks like this, and we need to make some adjustments. We would typically make it wider, and we would also make it longer. And you can see here that the edge of your fabric would guide right along the foot here, and your stitch is going to follow, and your binding is going to fit right in the middle of this area really nicely. This gives you a really good secure edge, and it's super wonderful for quilts that are well loved and used and are going to be drug about the house. Now, in the quilter's menu, on the final page, we have 3 different varieties. And if you look at the screen here, we have 30 millimeters is the length, which is a little longer than an inch. This is a big wide curve, and I like this one, but I like to shorten it up a wee bit. So I have more hills rather than longs. And then this gives me better contact on my binding as I go. We also have the option of even longer hills or even longer ones still. So one cool thing is if you have a favorite setting that you like, you can save your stitches into a personal favorites file, but you can also create a default menu, and I'm going to show you that. That way you don't have to remember how you love your stitch. When you choose that one, it's going to be that way. You can still make changes just like any other stitch, but when you turn on your machine and you choose that stitch, it's going to have your default settings. So let me show you that really quickly, because this is a feature I love on my Bernina. So when I have my stitches set up the way I want, I can go underneath my information menu, and there is a way to save that stitch pattern. When I turn off my machine, all of these settings are going to be the default settings now for this stitch. And this is really an efficient way to work, because you will find that there are stitches that you are always changing. And why not just turn on your machine and use it the way you'd like? So we'll go to the machine, and we're going to go ahead and I'll do a little bit of stitching and bring it back. And then I'm going to demonstrate how I use the edge stitch foot to bind. So let's go to the machine. Now I do have my zigzag plate in place on my machine. I'm engaging my dual feed because I have this function on my machine, and I find it to be a very handy option. And my machine is already defaulted to that stitch because I have put it in my permanent default settings choices. So I'm going to go ahead and put this underneath. And although clips are not necessary, I do like them to get myself started. I'm going to go ahead and lower my presser foot onto my fabric. I used my foot control pedal. One touch on a Bernina gets you ready, and I have a little bit of a wide area here, but right where my stylus is the edge of my fabric, and it's right on the inside edge of my toe. Now my stitch is going to fill this whole area, so I'm going to go ahead and get started sewing. And I like to use my stylus as a guideline to help guide my fabric into my foot. I'm approaching the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to do the fold up the bottom and fold down the top method. And I'm going to use the point of my stylus to help hold my mitered corner here. So I'm just beyond that fold. My machine is set to hover, so my presser foot came back up again. I'm going to round my corner. And I'm going to continue sewing. Now that is the serpentine stitch on the machine, and I've just made a very nice turn on that. Now, another option would be to use the edge stitch foot, and I like to use this on quilts that are more showy on the wall, and I want to have less of a presence of that serpentine look on my quilt, or I often use it on my table runners because they're smaller projects. Now, the edge stitch foot is foot number 10. It comes in 3 flavors, basically: foot 10, 10C, and 10D. Now you could use any one of those feet, but the 10D foot works very well on the machines that have the integrated dual feed. But what makes this foot kind of unique is that it has this fin on the bottom. And you can use it to guide it along the edge of something. And you can position your needle. We have 11 needle positions on a 9mm machine. You can move it left or right, however you would like. The ideal setting when we are binding would be that when our binding folds up, that our stitch is about an 1/8 inch in, and that the back side would land right in the ditch on the back side. This can take a little bit of finagling and test when you first start sewing. But if you have that longer straight stitch length of 3.0, you can take a few test stitches. You can take a look and see. If it's not right, you just take out a few stitches and you adjust your needle position. We have total stitch control on the Bernina, and we can easily move and position our stitches as we wish them to be. So with this foot, let's take a look on the screen and see what this looks like. So instead of having this big open area here, I'm going to change to the 10D foot. And you can see here, I could still make use of this serpentine stitch. That is a possibility because there's nothing hindering my stitch in this area. But I'm going to change to a stitch 1, and I'm going to elongate my stitch. Whoop, not quite that long. And currently it's set to have the stitch go right next to this guide, but I want to have my binding under here, and I need to move my needle position over a little bit. And I find that 3 is a pretty good length here. And what's going to happen is your stitch will actually kind of guide along that inner toe. But remember, the fin is underneath this area, and it's going to guide along the edge of your fabric. Now the toe of the number 10 foot is almost as wide as your binding. And sometimes I will increase my presser foot weight so that it holds it down a little better, because only half of your foot is sitting on your fabric, and a little extra pressure helps guide it through nice and straight. Again, this is something you're going to want to play with on your own. It's important that you take a little time and you try before you go to your big finished project. Otherwise, if you want to wing it, that's certainly an option too. But I'm going to go ahead and put this on my machine. I'm telling my machine which foot I have on because I've changed from that 20 foot to the 10D foot. One press of my foot control lowers my presser foot onto the fabric. The guide here is right alongside my fabric, but I do still need to move my needle position over a bit. And 3 isn't quite wide enough. 4 is maybe better here. Now again, my stylus is used to help control the fabric, not that my presser foot can't feed it in, but it helps fold it over and make sure that I have it nice and even. And remember, I didn't press the edge of my binding because I want the fabric to go where the fabric wants to go. Now in this case, I would have to do a little bit more adjustment because I did move my needle position 1 tick more to the right, and it looked better from my angle on the screen. Let's take a look here. But on the back side, depending on your look you're going for, this did top stitch inland a little bit. If you want it to be more hidden, you would want to have it a little bit closer to the edge. The important thing is that your binding encompasses the edges of your quilt. It looks nice and it's durable. Now I did a straight cut binding For longevity, it is recommended that you do bias binding. And again, I'm going to leave that up to your personal choices. Very often, unless I have curved binding, I will just use straight binding. Yes, I have a question.
Do you want to talk about the walking foot a little bit for binding?
Yes, I will talk about the walking foot for binding as well. Now, I usually use my dual feed feet because they're super easy. I tend to have a little pile, and I'm just going to give you a plug for later, Joy's Top 10 Feet. Joy's Top 10 Feet, I have that beautiful foot case, and I do store them in there when I'm cleaning up my studio. But if I have to be truly honest with all of my viewers, my top 10 feet tend to be lined up alongside my sewing machine, and I can easily move and grab. Now, the walking foot is really a great choice for binding because it is designed to move multiple layers of fabric efficiently through your work. And when I bind with my walking foot, and when Susie binds, and when Brenda binds, they like this open toe sole that comes with the foot. It is most similar to the number 20. That gives you excellent visibility, and it gives you good speed and control of your fabric. So again, a walking foot, you'll see it has this big foot out front, and it allows you to grab those different layers very efficiently to pull them into your machine. And I think Susie can bind a quilt in about 15 minutes, and not just a little one, a big one. But again, with that walking foot, you have the top layer of fabric, you have your batting, you have your backing, and you have now 4 layers of your binding strip. And the walking foot's really purpose and job in life is to move multiple different layers of fabric together at one time. And this really is a wonderful foot. Now this has a 5.5 millimeter opening, so your little binding hills are going to be a little bit smaller, but no worries, that works very well too. If you want to do the edge stitching like I just demonstrated, there is another sole for the walking foot that will do that as well. So those are great questions. That's just a little bit of a introduction to other possibilities for binding. And of course, the more you bind, the better you get. And you know, really, done is better than perfect. However, having said that, I think it is a wonderful goal to improve yourself and challenge yourself each time you sit down to your machine, because the more you know, the more you learn, the more you spend time with your machine, the more fun the process is and the greater your possibilities are. So, oh, we have one more question.
What time is the Joy's Top 10 session?
What time is the Joy's Top 10 session? Well, that's a great question, and oh, thank you. My assistant's telling me it's at 2 o'clock today. So we have another session at 10 o'clock, and the topic is there's a foot for that. And I'm gonna just highlight some fun feet. If you'll notice the quilt behind me, the quilt is called Quilter's Garden, or Stitcher's Garden, excuse me. It is a class I offered a couple years ago where we really pulled out all the stops and the decorative stitches. We tried lots of different feet. And again, playing on your machine is a lot of fun. And really, we're here to have fun, aren't we? And so there's a foot for that is my next topic. I hope you tune in at 10 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, it will be the Alyssa and Joy show. We'll highlight some other things that we have in our shop. And then 2 o'clock is my top 10 favorite, and 3 o'clock is It's a Wrap. So I hope you join me in the virtual booth today. These sessions are recorded and you can watch them later. Thank you for joining me and stopping by our booth. Have a good morning, and I'll see you at 10.